Exceptionality for SLP 364, April 2nd through May 8th, with guided reading journal due May 8th, and our last live chat May 9th, and we will be reviewing for the final. So what is exceptionality? Exceptionality is a term that's used by the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development to identify patterns of strengths and needs or weaknesses that are common to certain groups of students. So what are these groups of students? So what you're looking at right now is the bell curve. If any of you have taken statistics, you would be familiar with this image. This is actually the image that we use to give to parents during IEP meetings to help them understand where their student may fall statistically. So here in the middle, if you can see my mouse, where the average area is where most students fall. Skills in this area are similar to others of the same age and grade level, and approximately 68% of students fall into the average range. Then we have the upper end, which is gifted students. So these students are above average, significantly above average, or extremely above average. Their skills are typically higher than most of the students at the grade level. Then we have students with disabilities or who are below the grade level. So the magic number here is right around here at 78. So that's 1.5 standard deviations below the mean, or below the 78 standard score or below the 7th percentile. If a student scores on standardized tests that are given for special education evaluation, they would be considered significantly below average and would be possibly able to qualify under as a handicapping condition or a student with a disability. So these students are significantly below average, and they're lower than most students of their same age and grade. So how do we identify students that are in the gifted end or students with disabilities? So when a child is having trouble in school, it's important to find out why. The child may have a disability. So by law, all of the schools in the United States have to actually provide special help for eligible children with disabilities, and the help would be called special education and or related services, because there are services that are related to special ed. So the reason why we have to do this is because of a law called Child Find. Each state in the United States is required by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to identify, locate, and evaluate all children with suspected disabilities in the state. So any student that comes to you and the parent is concerned about something, possibly needing special ed, they're worried, they don't know what to do, it is the school, and because we work for a school and it's state funded, the state must conduct what is known as Child Find activities. So these are things like I go into a classroom if the teacher's concerned, and I screen a student for speech and language difficulties. We have the student study team process where we meet as a group to identify any needs, and we monitor the student's success, or if they're not succeeding, then we would take action. We have teacher conferences. These are all things where we monitor the student's success in school to make sure that we are accurately finding children who actually need the help. There are other things like First Five of California. There are hospitals that have early intervention. So there are all kinds of different ways to go about this. And this is actually, Child Find is the reason why I work with students at the age of 3, because that's when Child Find begins, is when the children are 3, and before then it would be early intervention services through an individual family service plan, or IFSP. Okay, so here's an explanation of how we monitor if a student is progressing in general ed. So it's called Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, or MTSS. This is a relatively new term, and formerly it was known as like Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, or RTI, but multi-tiered systems of support is an integrated and comprehensive framework that focuses on the Common Core state standards, core instruction, differentiating learning, student-centered learning, identifying students' individual needs, and aligning all of the systems necessary for the student to succeed academically, behaviorally, and socially. So California actually has a lot of programs. Our students are very lucky. We have RTI, Response to Intervention, supports for special ed, Title I, Title III, support for English language learners, American Indian students. We also have gifted and talented programs. MTSS offers the potential to create needed systematic change through intentional design and redesign of services and supports that quickly identify and match students, the needs of all of the students. So here's a figure that will help you understand this. So it's still a 3-tiered model. However, as you can see, instead of being one triangle, there are 2 triangles to make up one. So on one side are the academic systems that a student may need, but it also addresses the behavioral systems a student may need, because we all know if a student is not behaving and there's something, that they're not being regulated somehow, that they're not going to be learning. So they're tied in together. So it's one big system. So at Tier 1, it's all students, and it's preventative and proactive. Tier 2 could be some of the students that need a higher level, and it's rapid response, group interventions, and things like that. And then at Tier 3, it would be very individualized students. It's usually assessment-based. It can be high intensity, longer duration, and things like that. So academic systems would be things like going to the reading lab, small group instruction with the teacher. There's all kinds of different supports. Same with behavioral. It could just be that all students go to an assembly for Tier 1 to learn about, how to regulate behavior. Tier 2 could be a group of students that may need some counseling. And then Tier 3 would be intensive individual interventions where a student's going to counseling on a regular basis with a specific therapist. Okay, so there are 13 disabilities in California that students can qualify under, and they are listed below. We have intellectual disabilities, speech and/or language impairment, visual impairment, emotional disturbance, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disability, deafness, hard of hearing, deaf blindness, multiple disabilities, autism, and traumatic brain injuries. These are important to know. I've actually had to memorize them for my job, so I would suggest you get to know these if you're going to be a speech-language pathologist. You'll need to know them. Okay, so what is an IEP? An IEP is has to be written, plan, and program developed to ensure that a student who has a disability is identified under California Ed Code as well as federal law under Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it's for any student attending elementary school, middle school, high school, and so on, including in college. It's listed a little differently than an IEP, and it's the related services that go along with that. So the IEP is always developed by a multidisciplinary team, and it must include the parent. So I've listed some of the team members down at the bottom. This is not an extensive list, but it always has to have a parent, general education teacher, a local education agency representative like your principal or an administrator. It can also have the specialized academic instructor, formerly known as resource specialist, school psychologist, speech-language pathologist, counselors, advocates, OTs, IAPE, principal, and so on. There are a lot of people, which is why it can be very overwhelming to parents to attend these meetings. So every single IEP has to be individualized to meet the student's specific area of need. Many districts have gotten in trouble and have even been sued because they're not individualizing the IEP due to overloaded paperwork. Like if you're writing the same amount of services for every student, or you're writing the same goals for every student based on testing and not on the student's actual needs, many districts have been sued over that. So it's really important that you individualize it to the student that you have. IEPs include the student's disability on the first page, primary disability and secondary if there is one. There doesn't have to be. The student's present levels of performance, which also means what the child is currently able to do. You want to list the positives and the things that they are currently able to do with regards to academics, speech and language, social, vocational, gross motor, health, all those things, to get a whole picture of how the student is currently performing. And then the goals area, you address the areas of need or the weaknesses. So on the present levels, you do strengths, but on the goals, you target weaknesses. And then there always has to be an offer of a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE, in the least restrictive environment, LRE. So this is the services page where we discuss the services we will be providing to the student and how much they will be pulled out of class, which we then calculate into a percentage to determine if it is truly the least restrictive environment, and we have to discuss how we determined that it's the least restrictive. And the reason why this is important is because as a student, they need to be accessing the general ed curriculum. That's their right as a student, is to be in the gen ed classroom as much as possible, because that's where they're going to learn the most. If they're pulled out of class, they're missing instruction, And it really has to be very significant to be pulled out of the classroom, which is why inclusion, pushing into the classroom, is becoming so important. So the least restrictive environment piece is very, very, very important. And if you don't know a whole lot about it, I would suggest looking up what least restrictive environment means. And there's a lot of things you need to consider that are a little bit beyond our course, and I could talk a lot more about it, but I'm trying to keep this at a basic level just for the sake of time because our class is so short. So if you have any other questions about the least restrictive environment or a free appropriate public education, keyword appropriate there, please let me know. And it has to be reasonably calculated, which means it can't be too much, it can't be too little. And whatever is written in the IEP goes. You can't go over the amount of minutes and you can't go under the amount of minutes because you're affecting the gen ed percentage at that point. The IEP also includes any other accommodations or modifications needed for the student to succeed, both in the gen ed classroom and, say, in the special ed classroom. And again, the IEP meeting cannot be held without the parent. Period. Parent is control. Parent has the last say. It is a team decision, but the parent must be there. Individualized education plan continued. So to meet eligibility criteria for an IEP, the student's disability must be adversely affecting their academic performance. For some other disabilities like speech and language impairment, it can also be affecting them socially, vocationally, and behaviorally. It depends on the disability area you're looking at, but overall it really needs to be affecting their academic performance, and the access to the classroom curriculum has to be limited in some way, and that they're not progressing. So timelines. I live by these, being a school speech pathologist, so I made a timeline to kind of give you an overview of the special education timeline. So once a student is referred for an evaluation by, say, the parent, teacher, specialist, doctor, student study team members, and usually the referral comes in some form of written document, so an SST team notes, or a parent submits a request for testing. The special ed team then has 15 days to meet with the parent and sign an assessment plan. Once the district receives the assessment plan, the special ed team has 60 days to complete the assessment, write their report, develop an IEP, and then meet with the parent. So 60 days, so 2 months. So the whole process of qualifying or meeting eligibility for special education is 75 days total. Once the IEP has been signed and the meeting's been held, the IEP lasts for 1 full year. So an example would be 5/3/2016 to 5/3/2017. And every 3 years, the student is reevaluated to determine if they continue to meet eligibility criteria for special education, to determine if they're improving with our services, and to see if there are any other areas of need that we may have missed or have arisen in the last 3 years. Parents must be notified of any meetings in advance, preferably 14 days before the meeting, and then progress reports are completed and given to parents every 3 months. Okay, so not all students who have disabilities require specialized instruction. You can have a disability and not need an IEP. I know, right? Say what? So a 504 plan is a different type of plan that's developed to ensure that a child who has a disability that's identified under the law and is attending school receives accommodations that will ensure their academic success and access to learning environments. So basically what this means is that a student has to have a documented physical or mental health disability that limits one or more major life functions. So an example would be, say a student has a significant vision impairment and needs larger print on a test, may need extra time so they can read it. We also have had 504 plans for students with oh my goodness, it's been a long day. Students with diabetes who need to go to the office to ensure that they get their insulin. So it's a plan that the teacher has to follow to ensure the student gets what they need. We had another student who had a 504 plan because he had a kidney issue and he needed to be allowed to use the bathroom as needed. Some students may need, like students who have ADHD, sometimes it doesn't affect their academics, but they may need, say, extra breaks or a fidget to play with or extra time on tests, whatever it may be. The 504 plan is another way to have written plans that the teacher must follow by law to ensure that the student is academically succeeding and getting what they need. Gifted students. Gifted students are those whose intelligence typically fall within the above average to superior range. However, gifted can also mean talented, right? So it's gifted and talented. So these are kind of fluid concepts, and they are different in different contexts and cultures. So, and even within certain schools, you'll find a range of beliefs about what gifted really means. So it's a little tricky. But we need to make sure that we're including diverse learners in gifted education programs and services. Too many students do not receive appropriately challenging curriculum and services, and as a result, they fail to reach their potential. So you may have a gifted student in your class, but you're not even aware of it because you're not providing them enough challenging material. And that was what I was talking about, where in my district, we had an outside evaluator determine that we're not challenging our ELL students enough, and therefore they're not performing as well as we would like them to. We need to be providing them more challenging and rigorous material so that they can continue to grow. I mean, if we're not giving the students enough challenges, of course they're not going to reach their potential. It's our job to challenge these kids. So the gaps in support of and services for our most advanced students are even more pronounced for children from minorities, ELLs, and low-income backgrounds. As our education policy focuses nearly exclusively on grade level achievement in an effort to close the achievement gap for struggling learners, another achievement gap has been widening. So what they're saying here is that we've all been focusing on the struggling learners, and we're not focusing on the most advanced gifted students, and so a gap is widening at the upper end of the bell curve. So we need to ensure that there is availability of rigorous coursework and gifted education programs and services at every grade level for all students who benefit from challenges, combined with equitable identification procedures. So that would reduce the underrepresentation of diverse students in gifted education programs. So it goes both ways. We need to have programs for those who need more challenges, and then we also need programs for the students who need more modifications. So the bottom line here with the special ed chapters is that you need to understand that as a teacher and an SLP or any other educator, you have to accurately identify all of our students' strengths and weaknesses. So you really need to get to know each and every student in your class and figure out where you need to close each academic gap. So you need to help them reach their full potential, should it be in a gifted program, general ed, special ed, or 504 plan. You need to learn the education and the special education law in whichever state that you choose to work in. So the law is really important because you want to make sure that you're following the guidelines and the process in your school. Every school has a different model of how they choose to run intervention, and right now it's changing quite a bit. Like I was saying with the multi-tiered systems of support, which was formerly a bunch of other acronyms. Once you're in a school, you'll see we have a lot. The process at my school currently is we have the glitter process, which is GLTR, which is grade level teacher review. Then we have the CSAT process. Then we have the SST process. So we have the assessment team. So we have a big variety, and it keeps changing. So make sure that you do your research and ask questions, especially when you start your job. And if you have any questions related to special education law and any of the eligibility criteria information, I know quite a bit more about all of that. But again, for the sake of time and just giving you a general overview, that is it for this week. I will see you on May 9th for our last chat where we will be reviewing for the final. All right, have a great week. Bye.